Hey folks, thanks so much for joining. Oh, let me turn on my video. Here's a good idea. Hey, nice to see everybody here, or at least see your names popping up. I really want to first start off by saying thank you so much for coming out, spending some time together with us. I kind of feel like I'm talking to a friendly crowd here, mostly because we were very specific about the fact that we're talking logistics technology. And one of my favorite parts of being in this space is that there aren't a ton of people that are animated by this, but the people that do like logistics and do like technology are really animated by it. And I'm excited. I think this is going to be a really, really fun talk. I've been looking forward to this since we started thinking about it. So of course, if you don't know me, my name is Eytan or Eytan Buchman, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at the Freightos Group. And today, for the next half hour, we have Eric Johnson from Journal of Commerce. Hey, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Ethan, how are you? Great to join you today.
I'm doing great. It's fun. I'm really excited about this. I think that it'll be a really, really good conversation. Just a couple of ground rules or to get people acquainted with what we're going to be doing here. If you have any questions, we got a ton of questions. I think over 30 questions or over 35 questions before we started. I don't think we're going to have time to get to every single one. Eric has graciously offered to try to answer some of those afterwards. So we'll try to get out answers once we're finished. If we have some time at the very end, I'll also move into some of those questions. The basic structure is going to be walking through three general kind of big picture or four general big picture questions about the future of logistics technology. We're really, I think everybody has heard enough about COVID. I certainly have. So we're going to try to steer clear from that as much as possible. Another last time disclaimer that I assume that everybody here has some basic familiarity with logistics technology. And if you don't, ask in the chat. We have some people online that can help as well. So just a quick kind of overview, just to give a sense of why we're even talking about this. Freightos, if you've heard about Freightos or the Freightos Group, we do a lot of different things in this space. I think we're probably best known for Freightos.com, which is an online freight marketplace that connects freight forwarders with small and mid-sized importers. We also run Web Cargo, which is a platform that connects airlines and some ocean liners together with large freight forwarders. And we also run SaaS applications for logistics providers. So we do a lot of different things. And what basically started happening when Freightos launched about 7 years ago, we were rightfully so called out by a lot of companies we were talking to. And they said, hey, why on earth should I listen to you? You're a dumb startup. You're not in this space. And they were right. I literally had no clue what I was talking about when it came to logistics technology. And what I did was I went online and I just started following people who knew what they were talking about. And all roads came back to Eric. Eric, I think, was a early believer in the power of logistics technology. I got up on the pulpit and just preached. And I've been listening for 7 years. And yeah, I'm here over the next half hour to listen. Again, if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. With that, we're going to dive right in. And I think one of the biggest keywords, something that we hear everybody talking about on the tech side, if you open up TechCrunch, you're going to see people talking about platforms. The 7 of the top 10, this is like a pretty cliche stat already, but 7 of the top 10 public companies in the US are platform companies. And a platform at the end of the day is just a online solution that connects supply on one side with demand on the other side. And the really successful platform companies like Amazon have succeeded because they've aggregated demand. They've taken a lot of buyers, over half of the households in the United States. Right now, I'm out in Jerusalem, Israel, and I still order on Amazon. So they've aggregated this massive amount of demand, and they've consolidated that to the ability that they have enough sellers that are coming to Amazon and selling via Amazon. And then they took that one step further in mid-2000s and launched FBA in order to kind of move upstream with that platform play. And one thing that's always been very clear is that the logistics sector represents a very broad platform, right? You have dozens or tens or dozens of ocean carriers, hundreds of airlines, probably tens to hundreds of thousands of trucking companies, anywhere, depends on the estimate, 20 to 100,000 freight forwarders, and then millions and millions of shippers, small and large. And it seems to me that this has to be a platform play. At the end of the day, there's a lot of intermediaries, freight companies that sell to freight companies that sell to freight brokers. And I think that this is going to be something that's shaping the industry and kind of who's taking control of the customer. So, that's kind of what I want to use to kick off the conversation, Eric. Where do you see demand aggregation and customer ownership playing out over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I sort of see there's sort of two competing forces right now. So you have the sort of traditional model of the way that service providers, whether asset-based or non-asset-based, engage with customers, meaning shippers, and that traditional model kind of cuts both ways, right? That both sides of the equation are used to doing things in a certain way. And that certain way has generally been one-on-one sales cycles, generally long drawn out sales cycles. It's why so many people go to TPM. They can get, which we unfortunately had to cancel this year. I'm not trying to plug it. I'm just saying that was a way to create a little bit of an economy of scale around some of those meetings, right? So, people are very focused on that model when it comes to service providers and shippers. The other competing forces, you've had software providers who are entering the space, and it's not just the last 5 years, it's been 30, 40 years of generations of software providers. And they are always focused on, is there a better way to win customers? They think of that themselves, and they think of that in terms of empowering their users. So, if you look at the sales forces of the largest carriers and forwarders, they're massive. You're hard pressed to say that the cost was a statement of intent.
Sorry, Eric, I think we're getting a little bit of the internet's a little bit unstable.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, I can get you. Good.
Sorry. Okay. Home internet, right? We're all dealing with these days. But you have a whole range of container lines who now have direct online channels. You have many of the top 20 forwarders now have direct online sales channels, or they're participating in marketable option for certain segments of the market specifically. But there's still pause from the largest shippers. I've had a number of conversations, both in private and both at some other events throughout the last year, talking about this specific topic, and they still feel like the best way that they can express their leverage and the best path for their company is often to just have direct negotiations with carriers or with their biggest forwarders. So to me, that's fine. There's so many different types of shippers that it's okay for there to be many different types of ways to procure logistics services. So I think that's a positive evolution. And I think, what you're getting at is the interactions in logistics, despite there being many parties involved in every shipment, they've tended to be point to point. Whereas the platform idea is everybody come together and we'll have a big party all in the same place. So that's going to work for some people, and I think eventually it will work for big enterprises.
I think that the stratification is such an important part of this all that we really don't know. We know that the person who's sourcing at Kraft Heinz is going to source differently than the person who is sourcing at a small SMB. Right. One of the most interesting things, and I think there's been infinite number of vendors that have tried to look into this, but what's kind of very interesting for me is ocean liners specifically. I think we've seen like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd over the past couple of years kind of making this very strong shift towards the SMB full service integration. Do you look at that as a drive to own the end customer and a way to squeeze freight forwarders? Like, how do you actually see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, this has been kind of that is not a new phenomenon that carriers feeling container lines specifically feeling that they were sort of sacrificing margin by ceding market share to forwarders. So I think having a direct sales channel is a very clear statement of intent that you want to own more of or the entirety of the customer relationship. So, and most of the companies that have those direct sales channels now sort of have stated, overtly or kind of alluded to or their actions are alluding to the idea that they want to have a bigger role to play in those shippers' broader supply chains. So I think it's undeniable that if you want to target segments of the market that you didn't previously target and you do so through an online channel, you want to own more of those customer relationships. So, we've reported on this a lot. There's been a lot of kind of acrimony behind the scenes among the forwarder community worrying about the effect of that. Now, I mean, I still think because of what we talked about a second ago about the variety of shippers that are out there, I still think there's plenty of opportunity for forwarders to kind of continue to own those relationships. And maybe they don't own, the procurement part of it, but they own all the other ends of it that are actually could be more valuable to their company in the end anyway.
I think that's such a good point, and it also actually leads into the next thing I wanted to discuss, because this is basically becoming a battle towards who can provide the best customer experience, and I think that's always where some freight forwarders have felt their edge, in that, no, we get the customers, you move the container, but we really understand the customer, and we can negotiate on their behalf, and we can provide that first and last mile better than anybody else can. And I think what I've been seeing, and I think there's a lot of factors that are shaping the technology stacks at both carriers and logistics providers. The one that I've always looked at is basically customer experience. This is, a lot of people ragged on Flexport earlier on. Hey, you took this platform that every large freight forwarder already has, you put a nice veneer on it, and that's where people are real, and that's why they're crushing it, just because they have this really shiny platform. And I think there's value in that. There's value to provide a shiny platform if that's what customers are going for. So I definitely see kind of that customer experience as this core idea that a lot of companies are not successfully providing. I'm curious, from your perspective, do you feel like there are key factors driving how carriers or freight forwarders are building out their technology stack? If it used to be about, internal efficiency, how are they selecting and why are they selecting specific technology stacks, TMSs, procurement systems, data analysis, whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you alluded to. It's pretty clear that the shift has been toward customer engagement tools, investment in that area. Online quoting, adding ancillary kind of services like insurance, finance, customs clearance. All of these things are things that the tech stack is being focused around being able to meet a customer at the point of engagement, then you kind of essentially what we're talking about is making all of these things more self-service for those who want it to be, right? So going back to the first question, I think more of the logistics industry is starting to concern itself with that initial customer interaction aspect and then the customer retention aspect. And that maybe seem like you're becoming more transactional, but the other way to argue that is that the web is making everything more transactional anyway. So why wouldn't buying freight kind of work the same way? And I think the other element, I know we don't want to go too deep down the COVID rabbit hole here, but one thing it's highlighted is the extent to which companies are able to work in a real distributed fashion. And so, right. It seems silly to say kind of right now, but a decade ago, there was still a lot of debate about whether cloud would really usurp on-premise systems. And obviously that kind of debate is pretty much over, but now it's like, which remote cloud service should I use? Do I go serverless? How do I build these kind of infrastructure things that underpin what I want to do with my customer. And those are the kind of questions that are being asked now, not do I need to sell a 5-year license for a really expensive piece of software. So, back to the initial point, as a forwarder and now some container lines, you're having to cater to some wildly different demands. And so maybe there's like a big e-tailer that wants to procure online and they want a tracking API and they want to do everything digital. But you also have 100,000 TEU traditional shipper that wants to negotiate its rates for 2 months because they feel like that's the way they do it. So you have to kind of be everything to everyone. And that makes it a little bit hard to know where to prioritize on your tech stack. So I think it's clear that there was underinvestment in customer facing software for a long time. But I also think it's the back end stuff, the operational network stuff that's way harder to actually pull off and ultimately more important.
Interesting. I've always felt, definitely more over the past couple of years, that a big part of where technology stacks are going is kind of liberating the data. That, of course, the larger logistics providers, carriers, freight forwarders, freight brokers, they've all been very reliant on big tech stacks. It's there's these like kind of prevalent claims that old-fashioned freight forwarders are using spreadsheets and using faxes, and obviously that's hyperbole. But I think like liberating data and taking those huge tech stacks and turning them into APIs and releasing them to the wild. Maersk has done a great job. Sorry. Has done a great job with their Maersk Spot kind of API. So from an API perspective, do you think that there are specific directions that larger providers are going for? Project 44 definitely out there. Are there particular sets of APIs, the MCA with their standardization on tracking? Do you think there's particular API focuses, especially open APIs, that you feel large providers need to be looking at?
The beauty of APIs is how malleable you can kind of make them. So really, I think it's more kind of, rather than specific ones that are universally kind of going to take hold. I think it's more what is your niche? Who is the customer segment you're trying to target? What do they need? And then figure out a way to sort of integrate data through an API around whatever that need is. So, I mean, visibility obviously is there, but it really depends. It's sort of back to that same, that the company that's more likely to want to procure digitally is more likely to want, a tracking API. The company that is more likely to want to spend time negotiating an annual contract is more likely to, kind of need visibility milestones via EDI, right? So it's back to that kind of, you need to, as a forwarder, or a service provider, you need to be able to kind of cater to whatever, meet the market where they want to be met. And sometimes that's via API and sometimes it's not. I think I'm more interested actually in what types of things that didn't exist in logistics transactions can be enabled by API. So can I pull in another service? Can I pull, like you guys, we reported on this, you guys pulled in an integration with FedEx, right? Like, can I pull in a documentation, a digitization documentation kind of service, or can I bundle in insurance or trade finance into a buying freight? And that really instantly is only going to be able to happen by an API, right? So those are the types of things that I think are kind of like actual difference makers. You can say, oh, visibility API is really interesting, but people have a baseline level of visibility.
Yeah, I love that. I think the API thing, especially, there's this amazing thing that Jeff Bezos did that they call the API mandate at Amazon a couple of years ago, where he basically said every single person that builds anything at Amazon needs to build it with an API. That API needs to be exposed within the organization. We have to assume that anybody within the organization or externally will use that API, so it needs to be secure. And anybody who doesn't build that API stack will get fired. It was like this very, very clear cut. Yeah, it was amazing. And I think the coolest part about that, and this is what you're saying, I think, which is, APIs, yes, you meet the customer where they are. My favorite part about it is you don't know exactly how that's going to be used. You can create a pricing API and you don't know exactly who's going to implement that and where. And that's why a big part of it is you build the APIs and then you build the strategic partnerships around it that really allow some flexibility, which I think
Right.
would be really cool.
Yeah, no question. No question.
Right. I just actually wanted to showcase this. Eric actually did not ask for this. I wanted to make sure that this got in here. Eric's been putting together some really, really cool kind of overviews of different places in the space. So this is just one example of it, and definitely head over to JOC if you haven't seen these. There's actually one question that I just saw popped up, which I do want to touch on for a second. Ted, who asked, whichever technology solutions are implemented, who do you feel like will end up paying the additional costs? Is that, the costs for that solution, is that being spread among the participants or charged to the customer? If Hapag-Lloyd or a large freight forwarder, let's say Kuehne+Nagel, implements a different solution, is that a cost that's being passed along to the customer?
That's a great question. So I think for a very long time, the idea, especially container lines, have been a little bit guilty of if we create some new service or some ease of business kind of service, we have to monetize it. We can't just give it away for free. And they have run, that mentality has run headlong into the Amazon mentality, which is just keep making the service better and better and offer more same price or rent. And it's a simplistic container line kind of. They can't monetize things in the way that they did before, like a documentation fee, and seems to be the incorrect way to say it. You don't want to take that approach to say, well, we created an API for XYZ and now we're going to charge you $3 per time you use it, right? Like that's just not the way that technology can sell.
Eric, we're losing you again. I wonder if you, Eric, we just lost you for a little bit. I wonder if you want to maybe just try to phone in to the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, sorry about this, everyone.
Yeah, it's all home. In the meantime, I'll just hum some fun music for people to listen to.
Are you hearing me now? Okay.
I can hear you now. Yeah, let's try it. We can keep trying it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Basically, I was saying that container lines and forwarders need to get away from the idea that you monetize every aspect of the development of your platform, right? So they need to find a better way to work pricing into their what they charge for a particular service without it being a discrete charge for technology development or technology innovation. That just is, absolutely. That's the expectation now of the market, is that your service will evolve over time. So yeah, I would say ultimately the consumer has to pay for it, but it should not be a discrete charge, and it shouldn't. And over time, you would expect to pay the same amount for increasing levels of service. It's like the microchip totally. Kind of thing, right? It doubles in size and halves in price over time, right? So it may not be that dramatic, but it's that same mentality.
And I would just throw in my 2 cents where, obviously the go for gold tech solutions are things that end up saving both customers and the provider money. So, in a perfect world, you get return on spend in a couple of months or a couple of years, whatever it is, and then it starts making everybody's life easier. So moving on to the next question here, you can't move through these things without talking about Amazon a little bit. So, definitely, I promised I wouldn't talk about COVID, but there is this long-term move from Amazon into logistics. Kind of one thing that I feel like a lot of people breezed over was their acquisition of a customs brokerage last year of Inlet. And, you talk about Bezos investing in Beacon, their new air fleet expansion. They're definitely going places, and they're always the elephant in the room. Do you feel like Amazon, and we can ignore Shopify in the interest of time, but do you feel like they, if you had to put money down, would you put money down on Amazon having this long-term global logistics aspiration? And who is that going to steal business from? Who's actually winning that SMB importer business right now?
So let me kind of, I don't want to ignore Shopify actually, but I'll try to incorporate the answer. So, I think if you asked Bezos and Jack Ma early on. If you gave them truth serum, I don't think either of them necessarily would have wanted to start a logistics business. I think what they do is they follow their expense line items. Is it a prohibitive cost? Yes. Let's figure out if we can do it better internally. Can we do it really well internally? Let's turn it into a service for the outside market. And if not, let's partner with a company or acquire a company and move on to the next opportunity. So, I don't think they necessarily set out to be logistics players, but they sort of have the ability to adapt and build markets where they see opportunity. So who are they going to take business away from? Well, I would argue that, all of the platforms, whether it's Salesforce, Alibaba, Shopify, Amazon is obviously the one in our heads the most, but I would argue what they've done is bring structure to the SMB world. And again, to go back to the
Sorry, Eric, we just lost you for 1 second there. That was a quick pause, but if you said again to go back to the
container
structured SMB. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the large container lines and the large forwarders not only didn't target small businesses, they actively avoided them, right? So what they are now trying to do is kind of backtrack and plug into those markets that the
Okay, sorry, Eric. We just lost you one more time. I'm going to ask the question. And we'll see if you come back by the next question. So I think that what everyone's looking at right now and what everybody has on their radar is these changing relationships that large logistics providers are having with tech companies. So most recently, and you've kind of reported on every one of these. The C-Rates acquisition by DP World, or Expeditors acquiring Fleet, which has started as a marketplace and then shifted to a digital freight forwarder. There's companies like Maersk, which invested in both Twill as an in-house organization, and then what used to be Freight Hub, but is now Forto, from an investment perspective. And then finally, there's this kind of buy versus build of integrate or partner with different organizations. So I guess kind of thinking about that theme, what do you feel like is really going to kind of spell out 2020 to 25, that acquisition, investment, partnership, all the above? Where do you see things going right now?
Let me just finish up on that platform thing. I think as a logistics provider, who wants to target the small customer segment, you need to think about how you tap into that network rather than necessarily compete directly against it, because what those platforms have done is successfully catalyze and structure that segment of the market that's been largely overlooked by the large service providers. So trying to go up against them, I think, is somewhat of a difficult chore. That's not talking about the larger end of the market, but just purely the small end.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a foothold that the large platforms have that. I think it's going to be a little bit hard to climb up against. There's definitely an interesting area where, as soon as, let's say, an Amazon seller becomes a little bit sophisticated, they start looking out at their options. And I'm pretty convinced that the larger freight companies are going to start being much more gung-ho about those SMBs, the really, really small importers that are particularly capable as soon as they have those technology capabilities. So it might not have been feasible for a large freight forwarder to service a very small business, but that's exactly where technology ends up giving them the edge to service companies that do not.
Absolutely. And I think you can build a universe of tools to kind of tap into that small market, or you can say, we want to be the logistics providers that these small businesses use because they're already in the network of this other platform, right? So it's about how much ambition and appetite you have for kind of building that ability to cater to small businesses after having not done so for a long period of time.
Awesome. Okay, let's. I'm mindful of the time. We got another 3 minutes or so, so I'm going to move on to the last question. I think everybody already heard the question, so I'm just going to blitz through it really quickly, which is, we're seeing a lot of different models of large carriers and logistics providers balancing acquisitions, investments, or integrating or partnering with different companies. Taking all that into account, what is 20 to 25, where large logistics providers and carriers really going to be putting their chips when it comes to working with tech companies?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'll try to go fast on this because I know we're up against it. I was hearing at the end of 2019 and early 2020, I was hearing a lot of whispers that this year was going to be really heavy in terms of M&A. But that was pre-COVID, so I don't know. I would imagine, and I don't know what that impact looks like, but it has to have some impact on the appetite for big, acquisitions. So of tech companies. So I think you need to think about it from the perspective of, if you're acquiring, you either want to get customers or talent or some transformative tech. I'm not sure yet that most incumbent forwarders and container lines feel like that transformative tech is there quite yet to justify the price tag that they might need to pay for it. That doesn't mean that it isn't there. I'm just going I'm sitting in their shoes and thinking from their perspective. And I think they're thinking, let's not overpay for something early on that would be more valuable to us in a partnership arrangement right now. There's also just the reality. There's so many technology companies that are out there and are still being developed every day. It's a pretty big bet to say that, I've acquired the best one, right, in this one, and as opposed to just setting up partnerships to kind of tackle discrete problems. Right. So I think 2020 near term, looking much more at a lot more partnerships. At the end of that 20 to 25 range, you're probably looking then at more acquisitions.
Awesome. And we just for the last couple of minutes we got a ton of questions, as I said before the webinar started, and I just want to maybe go into kind of rapid fire mode, see if you have a couple of really quick answers for some of these questions. So one thing that I came across that kind of spoke to me is what do you consider to be the largest obstacle preventing better tech adoption within the logistics and transportation industry?
Budget and appetite for substantial change. Awesome. I think for the most part, the tech is there and relatively easy to adopt. I think a lot of companies have sunk costs in technology that's hard to overcome, and when they're asking for, even if the tech is more affordable now. But
perfect. Yeah, and my sense on that is actually I think these companies are adopting technology. I don't think there's a huge barrier to it. I think it's actually happening, much more than we give the industry credit for. And there used to be a tech barrier, then it was a cultural barrier, and now I think it's just a matter of there's so much out there. How do I actually implement it all, and how do I prioritize it? What are the top 3 KPIs for mid-sized shippers that you feel logistics providers should be offering?
KPIs. You need so less variance between what you contract for and what you actually are invoiced. So that I'm sort of a freight payment geek, having written about that for 10 years, and I still feel like it's a pretty underanalyzed or examined part of the business. So just less friction when it comes to what you expect to pay versus what you're invoiced for, and then what you end up paying. So that's certainly one. Speed of visibility and accuracy of visibility, I think, is another metric that I think shippers especially are starting to hone in on. Is it's not good enough, and especially honing in on, like, do I need a update on ocean every 2 hours, or is every 8 hours or every day okay, right? So I think just figuring out internally what you actually need versus what a service provider is actually offering. Third one would be how much time do you spend? So I would say this: how much human resource time do you spend on negotiation, procurement, and also on data entry? So if you can track that as a metric, or if you as a service provider can highlight for people those 2 aspects of how much time is spent on things that could be automated or made more efficient, I think that would be a really valuable KPI to provide to the market.
Awesome. And I wish we had more time. I think me and you were joking around a little bit when we prepped for this that we could easily talk about this for a couple of hours. So, maybe somewhere down this line of future freight, we'll sync up for part 2 of this conversation.
Absolutely. Love to come back.
Awesome. I just want to say, thank you for that. And of course, I mentioned this in the email that went out, but you want to follow Eric, and beyond just following him on Twitter, there's a discount on Journal of Commerce. So you can use Freightos 10 at checkout and get a 10% discount. And the last thing, I want to extend this to everybody that's here on the webinar. In 2 weeks, we'll be doing the second episode of this with Dr. Ralph Beluza, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Hapag-Lloyd. And specifically, I asked Ralph to join us because there's been this transformation that's been happening at Hapag-Lloyd that I think is amazing. I think one of the biggest differentiators that I see at the digital freight forwarders that are joining, and what really sets them apart, is that they don't treat freight as only freight. They're kind of adopting these startup mentality policies and tactics. So even like the most basic thing, which is when you search for a quote on Hapag-Lloyd's website, you'll get a follow-up email 2 weeks later asking if you're interested in booking it. And I'm always shocked by how many companies don't do that. So that'll happen in 2 weeks. And as soon as we finish this webinar, you'll get a link popped up that asks if you want to join for that. But that's it. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Eytan, so much for having me. I apologize to everyone for the technical difficulties. I'm sure Ralph will have a much cleaner internet connection than I do.
We got through it. We're good. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.